All right. Thanks for being here. Gino Payne, director, producer, filmmaker. I'm sure we could add some other things to that list. What do you think, or what did you think making a movie would be like before you made one? And how does it compare to reality?
I mean, honestly, I just thought it would be fun. I was like, this will be fun, and I never had this sort of like journey to making a movie before I made my first movie. It just kind of all happened, and I found myself in a position to make a movie, and I was like, okay, well, I'm not gonna say no, and so we jump right into it. It was So yeah, so I guess to answer the question, I kind of thought it would be fun. It is fun, but the bigger the project, obviously, the higher the stakes, and the pressure mounts for sure,
Yeah, that pressure, and then the all the little things you didn't think about. Maybe
for sure.
it's like writing a book, where you go, yeah, I could write a book. I can write. It's just writing a lot, and then you think about all the stuff along the way. Where that's why everybody doesn't write books, is because of all those little steps. That's why everybody doesn't make a movie, is because of all those steps that you have to keep doing to see it through to the end. I
Yeah,
wonder how many start and then never finish projects like that.
a lot, a lot. That's one of the things I deal with. As an independent filmmaker, like I fancy myself more as an independent filmmaker than any of the other jobs that I do for the studios, because that's sort of what I ultimately strive for, is to produce and direct my own stuff. But I do camera and stuff for other people, but I identify as an independent filmmaker, and as an independent filmmaker, I do lots of parts of the production line. And so one of the main things that I find myself busy with when I'm not working on my own projects is salvaging what other people didn't finish, um,
Mm.
and trying to help get that stuff across the finish line. And it's not any thing to really be ashamed of, or to just not a knock against those guys, because not everyone's first time was as fluid as my first time, and I didn't have maybe they didn't have the support system that I had. I didn't have an amazing support system, but I did have help. And so you kind of jump into these projects, and some people are unprepared, and it falls apart.
Is most of it, or the biggest thing, maybe the hurdle of entry? Is it the getting the money for it?
Oh yeah, yeah. The biggest part is the money. Like I said, I wish just to sort of paint the picture so we understand what we're talking about here. My first film was it happened because I was in Atlanta shooting music videos and shooting weddings and shooting sports events and anything anybody would let me film. Right. I tell people all the time that anytime someone's going to pay you to do a video production on almost anything, it's like they're taking a massive risk, because if you don't do it right, then they got to try to recreate that environment, that scene, that situation. And that typically costs a lot of money. Whether it's a wedding or a sports event or whatever it is, this lost footage that you didn't get right, it's going to cost them a lot to do it again and then get the footage right. They got to pay somebody else, and now they're doubly scared, right? There and so boom, so I was shooting stuff for this, in Atlanta, and Hurricane Katrina happened, and then there was like a charity event, and then someone said like, there's a lot of entertainers that's going to be at this event. Why don't you come and capture some footage so we can then put it out? As like this thing happened where all these artists came together. I get there, and there's this one artist who sees all the cameras that I've amassed over my time of putting stuff together and shooting, and he says like, "Can you make a movie?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And he's like, "Oh, cool. So you can make a movie." And I'm like, "Yeah, I mean that's what I went to school for, and that's what I want to do, and that's what I made smaller versions of it." Actually, no, I had made a short film at the time, and so
Well, video is a
yeah, I
movie, right?
made videos and I made all kinds of things, but never anything where you really needed to sync the audio to the video,
Oh, okay.
which is a big part, you
Yeah.
know. And so yeah, and so we jumped right in. He was like, "All right, cool. Here's the deal. I got this money. These people are giving me this money to make these music videos. They're giving me like '90s budgets to make music videos. Like in the '90s, like music videos budgets was like $100,000. Like it was crazy, you know.
Mm.
And he was like, yeah, and they don't understand DSLRs and like like I can just call like everybody in my neighborhood to come out and dance around on some cars to some music and we can make a music video, and then we can take the rest of the money and make a movie. And I was like, sounds like a plan to me. And so that's what happened.
Nice.
Yeah, so it was definitely an avoidance of the biggest hurdle that people typically will have is how do you convince people to give you a reasonable amount of money to make a movie. I mean that definitely was a break that most people don't get.
Is it better as an independent filmmaker to own your own equipment or to rent it out on the case by case, job by job type? Like, do you want the camera or do you want to rent a camera?
As an independent filmmaker, especially if you're doing micro budget filmmaking, which I would say micro budget is anything $100,000 or less. Micro budget, right? Obviously, if you talk to a studio exec and you tell them, well, you made your film for less than $1 million, they're kind of like, oh, I'm afraid to watch it. Probably look like
Mm.
it's just madness.
Blair Witch thing. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, worse. Like Tubi must be stopped. Have you ever seen that thread where like the Tubi
I haven't.
videos, or it's just
Yeah.
it's you got to check it out. Tubi must be
Okay.
stopped. And it's out of control. It's just like your continuity errors, just stuff that don't make
Mm.
sense. Like the end of takes left into the movie. It's awesome. It's like you can get a great laugh.
It's like
But
reading
yes,
a bad book then. Okay.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It's like a bad book and a bad publisher, with
Yeah.
like just unbelievable like pages with like errors on it. Like that way did they realize they printed this? Kind
Mm.
of thing. Anyways, so yeah, I mean, you want if you're doing micro budget filmmaking, you want to own equipment because overhead is the biggest one of the biggest things, right? So if you're gonna be able to make a movie, you can make a movie for 11, 20, 30K if if you don't have to rent a bunch of equipment. If you can just find some people who aspire to certain roles in the industry and say, okay, cool. Like you're no longer an aspiring boom op. You are a boom op on a feature film. Here you go. This is my equipment. Take a week to learn it.
Mm.
I will meet up here and we'll work it. You're no longer a scripty. You are aspiring to. You're gonna study this. You're gonna do all these different roles. You have all the equipment and you can give people their first chance. You don't have to, rent it with a day rate plus insurance plus accessories, the batteries, the cables, the lens, the adapters, the things you don't know you need until you are
Mm.
there with the camera and you're trying to figure out why it won't connect to this one system you're trying to use.
Yeah. I always thought it's better to know the equipment that you have. So maybe if you have something that broke, you rent it that you know how to work, but to try to
Mhm.
get, I don't know, what is it called? I don't know the names of all the cameras, but to get some expensive camera and then think I'm going to get a great picture out of this better than the camera I have and know how to operate. Maybe that's the error is the better picture might be so minute. It's not worth it once you get to a certain level of technology.
Yeah, and that first, like you said, the first time you use that camera, you're gonna make mistakes that you didn't know, you're gonna regret, halfway through, you're gonna see, oh God, I should have been doing this with this particular camera. If you don't already know that camera, obviously, once you know all the different camera systems, then it's different because at that point you kind of know, these cameras you got to do this, and this camera you got to adjust for, you got to, only look at the data, or these kind of cameras you want to check for the black levels and make sure, so they're all different systems but yeah, you're gonna make those mistakes if you don't know those systems.
Did you, when you were thinking about filmmaking, did you first get a camera and just start filming everything, whether it was like a 8 millimeter or a VHS or digital or whatever, and you're just learning the different ways to shoot something? Like when I look at it of writing a book, I think, how am I visualizing this scene in my mind? How do I want the reader to look at it? How am I experiencing it? And then I used to be more mystified by filmmaking as far as going, wow, you look at the dissections of scenes and the way the panning comes across and then it stops. And then this person starts moving. Speaking of panning, and the person starts moving, and then that's to be able to show more like structure in this person's thinking than it is if they started moving before the panning stopped. Just all those little things that I don't know. I wonder how much of that is real and how much of that is just explained after the fact because you've done a shot and you go, man, that looks good for some reason. So there must be something to it. There must be something to the you shoot from below to make the person look
Yeah.
strong and you shoot down to make them look weaker. But how much of that did you go through before you got into the filmmaking career of just thinking about the shots, lining up shots, and how you're going to do certain things?
Yeah, I would say like starting out, I'm sure it's the same for a lot of people. You make happy mistakes, where you get a shot and you're like, wow, why does that look so good? What did I do? And then you maybe go out and recreate it and you're like, wow, like, so every time I do it like this, it looks like this, they can tell you all about composition and using the one thirds and you're shooting through this third or putting your horizon at the top of the
Mm,
bottom and all the motivated camera angles and the motivated camera motion, I should say, and the hero angles and the confrontational angles and everything else, but it's not gonna really click until you're out there in it and you see how it affects the way it feels. Um, and so not the way it looks, the way it feels. You see how it affects that. And and so yeah, you make those happy mistakes and then it becomes something that you understand and something that you know. And then you go as a more experienced filmmaker, you plan, you make that a part of your plan and you start to understand it. So at first, you know, if you're good enough or lucky enough, you make those mistakes or you make those decisions. But certainly as an experienced producer, I mean, sorry, cinematographer or director, you you're planning. You're saying, look, I'm going to start this shot off as a wide angle, and I'm going to be able to see out his window, and I'll be able to see his camera on the right, and then I'll push in and I'll push in and I'll push in until I'm right to where I can just see over, below beneath his cap of his bill to the top of his nose, and we'll be right in his face, and then it'll really suck our viewer right into where this guy is, and we can get that intimate shot without having to see all the space. So it really starts out as mistakes, but then you sort of find out what you like and what's going to fit the story that you're trying to tell.
I guess that's the good part about either on the job training that you do with yourself or that you learn from someone else
Mhm.
and getting the education and the classes on it that you don't have to, like, if you had a list of how do you open a shot or open a scene, what's going to be good, how do you do moving. So if you just have that, it's like somebody giving you a toolkit and they go, here's the tools and this is what you can do with them versus you just trying to figure out what this tool does. So,
Yeah,
okay, there is something to the magic, I guess.
yeah, no, I mean it's learning. There's so knowledge, training, and experience, right? So what you learn, what you know, your knowledge, what you've learned in school, and what you have acquired, the knowledge that you have, right? So like imagine speaking of airplanes and all the crashes that's going on.
Mm.
I was just watching some videos like, holy moly. Um, but so knowledge, right? Someone teaches you how to fly an airplane in a classroom. Are you gonna be any good at flying it? Probably not.
Mm.
But then you get the training, right? And then you take that training and you're in the simulator or you're in the training lessons and you do that, right? But then that extra special layer is the experience, right? The experience is, now I know how to do it, but then what happens when what was in the book and what was in the simulator, it doesn't go like that. What happens then? How do I adjust? So the KTE, the knowledge training experience, are all three different layers, and I'd argue that the most valuable one is the experience. I think a lot of professionals would agree. However, a lot of people try to overcompensate with training and schooling for the experience. You gotta just jump in it, right? You can you can become an expert with just experience. You cannot become an expert with just knowledge and with just training. You can become an expert, and it's my grandmother. She's from Georgia. She's an old Southern lady. She used to say, "You got to remember, there's a guy who read the book and the guy who wrote the book. You got to decide which one. The guy who wrote the book, it's possible he left something out by mistake or by happenstance. So you want to get in there and dive into it because there's going to be things that you forget. You're gonna they didn't once you're experienced, there's things you forget that they taught you in school because it's just useless to you at that point.
Nice. That all makes great sense. With flying, my personal experience with it when I started doing the private pilot stuff, and
But you're a pilot.
yeah, private pilot.
Nice.
I fly a Cessna, so I can basically fly anything.
Oh,
The
super cool.
No, that's not true. That's just what I think. Okay,
No, no, it is true.
that's
My
what you
family
say.
flies Cessna too. They're out in Kansas.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So the difference there when I started flying, and I was like, man, this opens up a whole new world. Then we break out into song of a whole new world. This opens up a whole new world of like, I can get to this place this much quicker and this place. And it changes your perspective because you're like, this is really close. It takes me a long time to get there in traffic, but I can just take off and land and I'm there. But I think the biggest thing for flying, that the realization that hit me was, if you don't do something the right way, you're going to die. That's why people don't have that's why everybody doesn't have a pilot's license.
Yeah.
And because once you get up there, you're like, okay, this is great. You're thinking about all these things, but then you're like, wow, I could just, if I stopped right now, I'm dead. There's no option to just pull over and stop. It's you still got a lot of complicated things you need to do in the correct order in
Yeah.
order to not run into someone else or just fall out of the sky yourself. So
Yeah. That's so, piloting
that
is one of those job one, being, aviation and is one of those jobs that I sort of put into this block of like, when I'm trying to explain like high functioning, like today we got to be on our shit type thing. Like, when it's like, pilots and soldiers and doctors, it's like today I want you to operate like you're operating an airplane. I want you to operate like you're operating a surgery or you're kicking down a door, Like today, I want you to operate like these perfections. That every day they think it's got to be right across the board. We get it wrong, because every all the rest of us, we get to kind of, especially us in the arts, right? We're like, yeah, we're making it up today. We're gonna break all the rules and and do everything the opposite way. And but those jobs, man, like if you get it wrong, bro, it's like you said, you're going to die,
yeah,
and or someone's gonna die in the doctor's case.
yeah, it's the forgiving world of, I guess, making things up or reenacting things versus actually doing. I'm sure you can get killed on a film set by doing something wrong, and you blow something up. That's going to be a problem. So you need still that there are certain jobs that you can have more than one chance, and then other jobs you might get another chance if you're lucky. And so
I'm living proof that you can mess up really bad on a film set and live. So you can definitely mess up on a film set. I mean, and a lot of those like high, intense jobs on the film set, they're definitely done by the same kind of category of profession that I'm talking about. The firefighters are there, and the explosive ordnance guys are there, and they're like, "Don't, you're not in charge. You don't say X, and I say I have they it's a different thing. Film is yeah, as much as I love what I do and I think the world of it and I think we're changing the world, blah blah blah, you know, um, there's a different layer to it. My
well,
brother is a career soldier, and I spent a little time in law enforcement in college, and so I know that there's just like a different layer to what's really serious.
the don't ignore my hand motions right now. I'm just talking to my camera. Um, what kind of law enforcement did you do?
I was a police officer
Where?
in Atlanta.
Atlanta. Okay. I was a trooper in Virginia for
You were trooper, state trooper.
14 years. Yeah.
Nice, 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 nice. Yeah, I mean, you guys, I don't see that's a different layer to what, because see, I always wanted to avoid um the highway and traffic and any. So what was funny was that like my guy used to, they told us in the academy, they're like, oh, so here's the number one way police officers die, on the
Traffic
road.
crash. Yeah.
And I was like, they were like on the road, and you think like, yeah, of course, oh yeah, we're going super fast and yeah, yeah, but that's just not it. It's just like all the other shit that happens when you're getting out of your car, or when
Mm.
you're dealing with someone on the side of the road and all this kind of stuff, or like other vehicles slamming into you. And early on, like I think like in field training, I pulled somebody over. The genius pulled over in the, not on the right side, on the left side. And now looking
Mhm,
back, I think
mhm.
it was like a big fuck you type thing. Um, and he pulled over on the left side, and then like, so of course I put my lights on to try to notify the cars, but it was right on a curve, right? And
Mhm,
as a
mhm.
rookie, I didn't tell him, hey, move your car, pull over, go over there. I just did what, stopped behind him, and then like a car like didn't see us around the corner and like swerved and almost hit my car, but he swerved into, so if we're parked here, there's like a little space on this side. So this car swerved around to this side, which is where I was standing. I see
Yeah.
this car. I jump up on the medium, right? I jump up on the medium, and this car misses me by like, I mean, I'm talking about a little bit, right? All of my athleticism at that time saved me, right? And
Mm.
yeah, and so now I'm sitting up on this medium, and this person is in their driver's seat, and I'm on the radio sitting on this medium, and it's like, Georgia, right? So Atlanta, like 75 or 85, right? So it's like 5 lanes going both ways. And I'm like, I'm not coming down. I'm like, can we get another car to pull up another 100 yards behind my car, another 50 yards behind my car, so that we can get some sort of chain of visual, so that they could avoid that. I'm sure as a state trooper, you guys have like protocol for this, type of pullover. But we're, PD, so we just pull them over where they stop.
There's there's knowledge, training, and experience and everything. And then it just depends on, that's a lot of experience stuff. You can learn in the classroom, how to do a passenger side approach, driver side approach, whatever, when to pick your spot that you want the person to stop. That's not always going to work. So then it becomes that gut feeling over however long you've been on the road to think, okay, this person is probably going to do this. So I need to wait and turn on my lights here, or do this a different way, or pull up in front of them, and then, whatever. So I did notice that I was in Virginia Beach and Norfolk, and we were mainly interstate. And I really like Atlanta's interstate because they do it upright. I like the 5 lanes, the 6 lanes, whatever, in every direction. I like more lanes, put more lanes in. But there is a difference between the trooper that works in a rural area and one that works on the interstate mainly,
Oh,
just and that's police in general. Like if you're in the city, you're doing different things than you're going to do in the country. So from from my perspective, when I was in the country, it was a lot more, or there was a lot more like deer wrecks and domestics and things like that. But when you're in the city, there's a PD there for all that, and you're doing mainly interstate or highway order maintenance through traffic control. But the it is weird because you'd get down into the city, and I'd try to help like a Norfolk PD on a domestic, and there's 40 or 50 people around, and that's really uncomfortable for me because my training was all on the interstate. And if you got out of your car, that's a separate charge. And if somebody stopped, you could tell them to get back in their car or leave or whatever. You had a more controlled environment. Not true for every trooper in every place, because it's I was primary interstate. And you get real uneasy, and you go upstairs and you find the PD guy that's there by himself, and everybody's yelling and all this, and you're like, this is crazy.
yeah,
And I go, hey man, are you all right? He goes, oh yeah, I'm good. Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna get out of here because this is crazy. But you
yeah.
see that same PD guy on the interstate dealing with 10 cars running into each other, and he's got the same feeling I did in the domestic. So It's just that training experience, as you said before. It's
Yeah,
yeah.
it's like, I would talk to my, I'm an identical twin. I would talk to my brother when he was deployed, and I would say, "Are you like scared? What's the deal? Like, are you ready?" He's like, "Dude, we're so trained at this. We feel prepared. You know what I'm saying? We don't feel. I mean, of course, there's a moment when I'm sure there's moments where it's like, oh God, this door. This doesn't feel right. We gotta hit this door. We gotta hit this village. Something's off in this in on this roll, on this patrol, or this QRF." But um, but for the most part, they feel sharp. They feel like they're prepared and they're trained. And it's the same thing you're referring to. It's like in your space, you're trained, you're prepared, and then you get experienced, and you just know you have the situation under control, and nothing's you're the you have control of the situation. You're the most dangerous thing in the situation. Um, but then you get out of your element, and again on the highway, I just couldn't stand being on the highway. I couldn't stand being on the side of a road. I mean, because you gotta kind of lock in on what you're locking in on, and the cars are just just
Mhm.
shooting by, and I just no, sir. Like pull, like as I got more experience, I would get on the radio and tell, hey, go ahead and make a right up here, go and get off, like let's go and move, and then of course they could say, I'd rather be where the light is, blah blah. Okay, fine, and you
Yeah.
kind of got to deal with it how it is.
Yeah, there's so much to it. That's why I liked policing so much is there was so much versatility in the job, different things you could do. Like I was a canine handler for some years, motorcycle, regular car. It was there's a portion of it where you just surrender yourself to, I'm going to get killed doing this. So I'm going to stop worrying about getting killed and I'm just going to go out and do what, trained and supposed to do. And that's the same thing for the military. The same feeling with that is getting deployed. I was like, I'm not coming back from this. So let's not worry about any of that. Let's just go do what we're supposed to do. And then it's those times after those scenarios happen where a person had a gun or there's a shooting or whatever, and then in the moment you're good, you get back from it, and then you have time to think. That's when you're
You're
like,
like,
oh,
holy
that could
moly.
have easily been it. Could have been curtains on that one
Mhm.
easily.
Yeah,
So I imagine it's the same thing with any job that has a lot of things you have to think about. Directing too is where you would, if you have a beginning director or a seasoned director, and they're dealing with all these things and they already know what they're going to have to deal with. So they know that's what's going on. That's what's going on. The person on the outside would look at it and go, how are you handling all of that? But
yeah,
there were times in policing and in the military where things happen and it's unfolding like a movie. Like you go, wow, most of this is not like the movie, but this pursuit where the car is running into the Jersey wall and spinning around and there's fire shooting out and pieces of the road in the car are hitting the windshield and I'm standing on the brake pedal and I'm just remember thinking, this is like something on Cops, man. It's like something on Cops. So how does that experience filmmaking where you do you use a lot of those perspectives and not just perspectives as a person, but perspectives as what you were seeing and different angles?
mhm.
Do you use that in your filmmaking as well?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, definitely the perspective of how what's a big deal and what's not. You know, but I'll stick to it. Is that like you know, I'm not just trying to stand on some chivalry platform and say that like this ain't that, but like this ain't that. Like we are not, we are not, it's not life or death. Having been, a police officer in a major, metropolitan area where crime was just rampant. I mean, rampant. I mean, it's everything every day, all the time, everywhere. And it was, you deal with a lot, and every day, every call is everyone's worst day. The dispatch is never going to say, Unit 1619, I need you to report to 4121, Wiley Street. Mrs. Johnson has cupcakes for you.
Mm.
It's just not gonna happen. Like it's always their worst day. And in 2 months, you'll have to read your police report in court to even remember what the hell happened. Because it was just all every day, all the time, you know? So the way that it translates to what I do now is calmness in what people in my world called a pressure cooker or intense moment.
Mm.
But it's kind of like, dude, like we're gonna go back to our trailer and we might end up with a tough phone call and a budget that went up, or an actor that is no longer interested, or something, or a prop that we need to wait for it to come back. We're all gonna be perfectly fine. No one's gonna be injured, no one's going to jail, no one's gonna get their badge or gun pulled here. Everything's fine. There's not gonna be a news story about this. If there's a news story about this set, then we need that. We want that. Let's go. Publicity. You know, um, it's just a different thing. So I think that what I take into this is the calmness and the people skills. But the bullets just don't fly, and not necessarily the bullets I'm saying, but the pressure just doesn't cook the same way. It just doesn't cook.
Yeah, the hardest thing you've been through is the hardest thing you've been through. So
Exactly.
if dropping your ice cream cone on the ground was the worst day of your life, then a film not going right is really going to be terrible.
Yeah.
With
Yeah.
your with your flying experience, do you have a pilot's license too? If your family is doing it, or are you
Oh
flying around with
no,
them?
no, I just fly with them. So yeah, no. So my sister-in-law and my brother-in-law, they're pilots. They fly with Cessna out in Kansas from with the Cessna HQ. They do one is a private pilot, and the other is the show pilot that shows the planes
Okay.
to the new purchasers. And yeah, so every now and then they something works out where we get to take private flights to and from our family cabin, and they come in town to see us in Vegas. And sometimes we go out to the hangar and get flights from there. And then I'm always super curious about aviation. It's super cool. So I love aviation, and I'm just like, and Top Gun was always one of my favorites, and then the new one came out, and I love that too. And
Mm.
so yeah, just a trillion questions for me. I'm sure they had as many. They asked me as many questions as I asked them. Um,
Yeah, I think flying taught me how to look for things better because you're out there in the sky and you're looking for planes and you just don't when you're on the ground you're not that focused. You're not like I'm worried about something running into me or me running into something else. So it taught me how to look better, and it made me a better driver too for some reason. I'm not
mm,
sure why, but I think it was had to do more of the observant and then trying to think a little farther ahead. Like in driving, I was always trying to look 11 seconds down the road anyway. And 11 seconds when you're going 55 is different than when you're going 120. But
right.
that's one of those things where I remember a motorcycle crash on 564 out near NOB, and it was at 2 in the morning or whatever, and the guy was like, I don't know what happened. I don't know what happened. And I said, well, I think I do. You saw the shadow from a telephone pole or from a light, and it looks different when you're going 120 than when you're going 60. And he's like, what? I was like, because I do the same thing when I'm driving down the road and I see the shadows and you go, whoa, whoa, what's that? Is that something in the road I'm going to hit? But you don't have any time to react really because you're already past it because you're going so fast.
Right.
So it's those perspectives that you wouldn't get if you didn't have that experience, and you wouldn't, I don't know if you even put that in the textbook if you're writing a book about it, about driving fast. I don't know if you do that. I think that's
You
just
can't
something you
explain
pick
it.
up.
Yeah.
So with the flying, when I did my check ride with the FAA, yeah, I get that and the FFA mixed up. With the FAA, then they said, be prepared for the instructor to try to rush you. They're going to be really mean. And I was like, huh, okay, I guess we'll see. And then I get in there and the guy, you have to pay back then, I got it in 2012. You had to pay cash to the person before you started. So it's gone. If it doesn't work out, you've already paid. I guess that's a good way to do it on their side. But we get in there, we go through the checklist, and then we go get fuel, and then there's a pre-flight checklist again. And I was like, I'm going to go ahead and do this again. And he's like, no, you've already done it. You don't need to do it again. And I was like, well, I'm just going to go through it again anyway, overly cautious. And he goes, no. And he starts throwing stuff around. And I was like, hey, if you want to do this another day, we can do it another day, man. And we don't have to do the test today. He's like that the whole time, but ended up finishing. And he's like, all right, you're a very patient person. And I think that came from the law enforcement of just being calm around things, because when you get excited, it doesn't help the situation. And I'm sure that is useful in many jobs, and you can develop it in many jobs: construction, military,
Yeah.
whatever, even filmmaking, anything
Yeah.
where you can just not lose your cool.
Mhm.
That's that's a great lesson to learn.
Yeah, that's
So
the thing
with
I say translate is that calmness that translates for sure.
and then the report writing, like I like a good report, because it's one of those things where in policing you have these things that are more complicated or people didn't want to get involved with because of the paperwork. And then I thought, well, I can either be scared of those things or I can just do them better than I do now, get better at it, not be scared of it. And that meant like certain types of arrests, certain types of reports you have to write. So I appreciate a good report, and I think that helps my writing. How does that affect your how much writing do you do as a director? I mean, I know if you're doing your own stuff, you've written it, but if you're doing somebody else's, are you visualizing that and then writing down, all right, I want to open the scene like this, whether you're reading their script and just using it as the instruction or the suggestions for how to film it? How does report writing transfer over?
Yeah, there's way more writing than or typing, however you do it, than most people would imagine, especially most aspiring directors. I think the average person would assume there's more writing than the average aspiring director would assume there is, because they just want to get in there and direct. They just want to tell the camera
Mhm.
where to go and the actor how to feel and that kind of thing. But I mean, we are, doing call sheets, especially on the indie level. You're doing call sheets. Um, you're well, let's start before that, right? So obviously you're reviewing scripts and you're trying to figure out which script works, and you're giving the writer notes, and you're saying, I'm not saying this isn't a good script. I'm saying for the budget we have and the locations and what we have, these are the notes. You're going back and forth on that, right? Obviously, once you get past that, then you're casting, right? So now you're writing, you're pulling the sides out of the scripts and trying to adjust those so the actor knows, these are the scripts, these are the audition sides that you're going to read, but you're redacting things that you don't want them to have because you're going to give this to 100 people that are not going to get the role. And then you're like trying to write up an excerpt to tell the actor what what the character is feeling before this moment, and a little bit about the world so that they have something to go off of, because otherwise this is just a random passage and they have zero perspective, and they might make a decision that they wouldn't have made had they known that information. So you're doing that, and then you get into you get your cast and you're ready to move forward with them. Obviously there's multiple rounds of casting. You get your cast, you're ready to move forward. You're doing your call sheets. You're doing your wardrobe list and your prep. You got to let your wardrobe people know, based on this script, they can go through it and look at it, but you better check, especially if you haven't worked with them before. They're breaking down the wardrobe, and how many times this character is changing the wardrobe, and what props we need, and what locations we need, and your set locations and your call sheets. And then you get out to, once you're done once you're on set, you break out your set pieces, and what order you're shooting everything in. Then after set, you got you're not writing your closed captions, but you're dealing with your closed captions in your editor. You're dealing with your credits and all that kind of stuff. So if you are a studio director, a lot of these things I'm mentioning, you're not directly doing, but you are overseeing them in a lot of ways. Um, and if it's not you, then it's a producer that's doing it. But as an indie filmmaker, someone who's dealing with a budget that's usually $10 million or less, you're very actively involved in all these things, and this is a lot of paperwork that you're sending out, and it's going and it's coming, and maybe there's somebody that's checking behind you, but a lot of times there isn't. And so
Mhm.
you just kind of have to care very much about these documents. And as you just said, um, these you have to really care about these documents because this is what other people are going to use as a guide to get their job done. And we were talking about earlier about doing the reports and like getting to court and just having to read the report and say, okay, well, I do not remember this robbery that happened, because there's a robbery every night, every in two time, and you have two different times a night. Um, so you have to read this report, and if it's not detailed and you don't remember anything, what do you have to testify on? You're one of the key witnesses for the state. You don't you should have a report that's going to be good enough and detailed enough to at least jog something, or even if it doesn't jog, it speaks for itself. You can you can hand that back to the prosecution or to the defense and say, I default to my report, and you can go from there. So yeah, writing you do a lot of it, way more than people think you do, and you just have to give a shit about the content so that it carries its weight.
Yeah, I saw a lot of parallels with storytelling and report writing. Report writing is a stripped down version of it because you're not getting into like the the personalized description so much. You're sticking with fact and objective things. And then story writing, you add a lot more to. So you can write a book. If you are a good report writer, your book is going to, it should make sense. It might not be great, but it should at least make sense. Like people can follow it. And then I thought, well, script writing, I wonder why people have to have a script written from a book to make a movie. Why don't they just make a movie like the book? And then I started thinking, well, let me try writing a script. So I looked at a couple scripts, how they are written. I was like, wow, this is really stripped down, even from a report that I kind of liked it. Instead of saying, taking 3 or 4 pages to explain the scene, it's just outside grocery store night and then go forward with the dialogue. So I found it made me better at dialogue because that's how you're getting things across. But it also made me understand how important the actor is and how much they put into it because they could read it different ways. And even if you write something, you get your whole script together and you send it to a director. The director's got a point of view on it. And
Mhm.
then you got the budget guy looking at it going, well, this is great, but you're not doing that. And then you have the actor that's putting their spin on it going,
Right.
I mean, I like it, but what's my motivation? I'm
Mhm.
outside the grocery store, but what else? Like, how did I get there? So
Right. Yeah.
it's, I can see the elements of how collaborative it is. And then I wrote some books with another guy. So collaborating on writing a book, different than writing it on your own. I'm really glad I did it. I think it turned out all right. It made me more excited about writing on my own too, not in a mean way, just in a now I can do everything I want instead of giving up all this,
Mhm.
which you have to do. You have to go, this is what I think this scene is. And the other person goes, no, I think it's this. So you got
Mhm.
to figure, well, how important is it to me? I guess I'll just go with this. So I can see the collaboration of writing a novel with somebody else versus writing a script and then doing a film. It's so much more collaboration and
Mhm.
working with other people's perspective. It could be totally different than your original vision of it. I wonder if
Yeah.
that's why writers often look at movies and go, it's not how I would have done it. But I
Yeah.
mean, like Shawshank Redemption, different, way different than the book, but a great movie.
Yeah. I mean, I still think there's a bit of like mystery in why some movies um, choose to change things that seemingly don't need to be changed. Um, and I think that it really just comes to, like you said, it's a guy and an opinion that's, has a little bit more pull than the person who wrote it. Um, and, but I certainly understand why, Hollywood is more attracted to novels, it's simply because original content or original IP typically already has an audience behind it, especially if they're aware of it and they know of it. It already has an audience behind it. This was a bestseller, or this book was a cult following, or we know we know audience. There is an audience that connects with this. Can we take advantage of that audience? Can we grow that audience? What is the deal with this? We're not taking an idea that we think that I like, but it doesn't track. And I'm gonna have a bunch of guys with the money telling me that it just doesn't track. No, 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 we know it tracks. Um, so that's the first part. But then the other part is the book serves as writers will, as you guys will do like these backstories about things that gives the character motivation, or I forget what it's called. That's not always called a backstory, but it's the part of the script of the book that just basically serves to explain the world and the characters as they exist, right? So
Right.
when you're writing a script, like you said, it's very stripped down, right? But if you've taken it from a novel, all that stuff already exists. All that stuff it's already there. So we can choose to, if we're looking at like everybody wants to, every movie and every TV series, they want to talk about how many installments of this movie can we do, how many series can we do after the first season, how can we stretch it. Well, the book is just like, let's go look in the book, let's find a detail that we didn't use in the film, and let's keep this thing going. We don't need to rebrand and find a new audience. Let's keep the audience, let's grow it. So I think in that sense that, like, I totally get why, like, the money people are very, very attracted to novels, because
Mhm.
again, like, they're proven, they have an audience, and there's so much more source material, where you don't got like the director and the cinematographer walking into the writer's room like influencing everything and jacking it all up. Where it's there, it's solid, and it's proven.
So I guess that's why they say a director, you do a couple movies that other people want you to do, and then you can do a movie you want to do. You got to get
Oh,
that trust in people plus the experience so you can be the auteur on a movie versus just the director. Hmm.
and yep, writing the if yeah, you got to do those movies that fit where you are. That was one of the biggest lessons I got. Again, that first movie that I made, I don't count it because it was definitely out of the line of a normal progression for a filmmaker, But once I started, like, after that movie, I started trying to make like this film that was going to be a $10 million budget, and I was like talking to people, trying to get this money together, and met this lady at like the American film market, and she said, "Yeah, I want to come talk to you about it." I'm like, "Heck yeah!" She's like a studio exec, and she's gonna help me get the money. She sees my idea, and she sat me down. And she said, "Look, man, like, you're trying to make the movie that's like 5 movies away from the movie you need to be making. Like, you can't ask for $10 million if you haven't sold a movie for $10 million. You can't. Don't ask me for $10 million if you haven't sold a movie for $10 million. You have to make a movie for $5 million, sell it for $10 million, then I'll give you $10 million, right? If you want $5 million, you have to make a movie for 2.5, sell it for five, and then I'll give you five. And
Mm.
so at my point in the journey, I was still on, make a movie for $100,000 and sell it for $500,000. And so, you know, you just don't know what you don't know. You think you're gonna walk around and Steven Spielberg got somebody to give him money for blah blah blah, and
Yeah.
you're talking about the exception and not the rule. That's why you're talking about it, because it's such an amazing story. That's not the way it goes.
Well, I would think then that doing the weddings and filming anything you could is great experience, especially videos. I mean, that's if it's not just a concert video, if it's telling a story, like you got the music and a little bit of story going, that's something that you can exercise your directing chops on, and you just go from there. If you get a good, and I would imagine videos are easier to make, I guess, depending on your set. Is the set the biggest? Well, outside of paying a star, is the set the biggest expense on a movie?
Typically, the actors and the equipment is the biggest
Okay.
expense. But as we talked about, owning your own equipment takes that off the table. After that, I'd say the biggest line would be, yeah, your cast. And again, if you're making Avatar, then
Mm,
obviously your CG is your biggest thing. If you're making a Game of Thrones, then everything's expensive.
yeah,
But yeah, so I would say I would put it in that order of number one would be I'd say number one is going to be the equipment, and then number two is going to be cast, and then your set. Um,
yeah.
uh,
For the indies, you usually see it. It seems like it's more story and character driven than anything else. It's not the big explosions and stunt work and all that. It's not a blockbuster. It's a like some of my favorite movies are movies like that that are just and maybe that's looking at it from the writer's eye and going, "Oh, I see why they did that," or "I know why what's gonna happen next with here," or "That was a twist." But, hmm, I
yeah,
guess
I mean
that's
that element is affected as soon as it becomes, like you said, a blockbuster. As soon as it becomes, it enters the machine. Someone's looking at someone says, "Okay, I love that you want, this person who has this nuanced look and behavior. No, we need Kevin Hart and Dwayne Johnson."
mm.
And you're like, "What? No." And then they're like, "Yes." And then you're like, "Okay, fine. If it's gonna be Universal, fine." And then they're like, "I know you want it to start like this, but our audience, if they don't get hooked in the first 2 minutes, so boom, explosion right at the beginning. We'll jump back to that part." And you're like, "What? Okay, if it's gonna be." Then they're like, "Well, um, we gotta check our blocks. We gotta check our box. So we gotta get this person. We gotta get a female. We gotta get this. We gotta get this. We gotta get all these different elements that we gotta put in there, right?" Um, then then what was the other big one? Oh, your acts will have to be separated specifically, right? Um, you know,
Oh, yeah.
we need to separate, as opposed to a lot of indie films where it's here's the story, here's how it plays out. If it's a good story, if the viewer watches it, it actually happens. A good example of this is Goodwill Hunting, right? Goodwill Hunting, people got involved, right? People ended up getting involved, but that was purely an independent film. And Robin, oh
Williams.
yeah, Robin Williams, he got involved, and he just did it like it was at him at his stage, but it was purely an independent film, and they basically made a good story the way they wanted to make the story. But if that would have been a studio project,
Mm.
that would have been a whole different thing.
Yeah.
It wouldn't have played out like
Like,
that.
you gotta get the stars aligned. You have to have the right director, the right story, the actors at the right time in their career where maybe they're not looking for the big payoff, they're llooking for the most challenging role that will lead to more money. But, yeah, you gotta get all those together.
Because the one thing that I always try to stress to filmmakers is that what they don't what you tend to miss about like studio projects and what you should be considering on your indie projects is that the before a film is greenlit, the marketing department checks off on it. What? Yes. Before a film is greenlit, the marketing department checks off on it. What that means is that essentially they're looking at who's in it, what's happening, what's the built-in audience, what's the niche audience, who are we going to market it to, what time, what's the genre. All these things are looking at all these things and are saying, yeah, I think we can do this. Let's keep it at 20 million or less, and it'll work. We'll be able to get our return. We'll be able to get this out of it for sure. This is our floor. This is our ceiling. This
Mm.
is let's do it. And they give that number right back down the pipe, and then they don't see it again until it's time to start marketing. But they've already set those parameters, right? Whereas in indie film, we're saying this is a story I'm passionate about. Let's do it, and we figure out the rest. You know.
Mhm. Well, what is your most recent thing you've finished, and what are you looking at starting or have started next?
Yeah, so Goon of the Lagoon is a thriller that's based on a young woman who is still she's still recovering from the recent tragic loss of her parents. And so she decides to get away with her friends and to try to distract herself. But lo and behold, the getaway is at a lake house, and she lost her parents to a drowning. So now she's on edge even more, and she's trying to keep her head about herself. But between her uh, prescription drugs, her recreational drugs, and her thrill-seeking friends, the reality starting to blur as to what's real and what's not. And so her struggle becomes trying to convince her thrill-seeking friends that the this thing that's haunting them from beneath this lake is real, and she's trying to do that in time before it starts to claim lives. So this film is a feature film. We have a distribution, and it's at Berlin Film Festival. I'm sorry, Berlin Film Market right now,
Okay.
which is partnered with the film festival. They just kind of do the same thing. And so we think within the next 2 to 3 months, we'll know what platform it'll be released on, and we're super excited about it. So, what we ask people to do right now is go to our IMDb, check it out, because people are um, buyers are clicking around on it, trying to see who's who. And as you know, the more activity on that page, the better our actors and our film looks to buyers. So so yeah, that's what we're doing, and then we're still kind of combing through which script we want to move forward with in 2025, um, to sort of figure out where we're going to be. To be honest, a lot of it depends on what this film and a previous film, how the activity on that goes. Because I said you make the film that's next in line for you. Um,
Right.
so
How many do you have like set up and waiting then? Like how far out do you look as a filmmaker? Do you think this is this is whatever number movie I'm working on and this is the passion piece I want to get to, or this is the action thing I'm trying to get enough money to get into, or are you always on the lookout for another script that could get in front of those in
yeah,
your time of production?
that's still the blurry part for me because I'm until I make a movie that becomes like, like the thing that like, oh yeah, he's the guy from this, right? All the things that I'm known for amongst my followers on social media and stuff is studio projects, projects that I've been on. Just as like a cinematographer or like a camera department person or something like that. But until I make that project that, is going to allow me to make whatever I want to make, I'm always looking for scripts that are going to, have the indie film perspective in mind. And I fired myself as a writer like 3 years ago.
Hmm.
I was like putting out these films, and then like this is when we are doing festivals, and you'd get like beautiful cinematography, amazing actors, set design's amazing, the wardrobe is awesome, and just this the beautiful homage to the original, blah blah blah. But the story's a little
Mm-mm.
shit,
Mm-mm.
and a little weird. I didn't get what was happening, and you get the same consistency a few times. You have to look at that role, and
Yeah, a
it
little
was me.
self-awareness, that's good.
Yeah, and I was like, okay, cool. I'm not going to. I'm no longer at the stage in my career where I would just give my friend the boom mic. I'm no longer at the stage where I would just give my friend the camera and say, push it forward when I tell you to. Um, I'm at the stage where I want each role to be respected by a professional who has delved into that art and gives and want to be identified as that art form. So I have to do the same thing for the writing. I have to take that away from myself. And so about 3 years ago, I was like, "Yep, you're no longer the writer." We look at scripts, so I hold all my writers very dear because that's my only source material. And so I'm always looking for that. And then when we cross that bridge to where now I can give my writers and I do work at writers where I'll give them like a 3 pages of material and say, "This is my outline for this story. Would this interest you to write this?" you know? And depending on who they are, they're like, yeah, no, 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 it's not for me, or oh, awesome, I'd love to do this for you. Of course, you get paid. You're commissioning
Mm.
something and you want to own it, you're gonna pay them. Um, so yeah, there's a little tit for tat back and forth trying to figure out, but scripts that already exist, always looking at them.
What's the best way for people to follow your work and keep track of what you're doing besides the IMDb for the Goon of the Lagoon?
So Instagram's probably the best. Sir underscore Gino. Um,
Okay.
Instagram is usually the best. Then after that, I'm on Facebook. But yeah, yeah. So those are the best places. Of course, our websites and everything are linked in those bios. But Sir underscore Gino on Instagram. I always say, like, if you are an actor or if you are any sort of tech skill set within the industry, let's link up on social media, because ultimately that's insight and in mind. And if I'm constantly seeing your work, and I know that you're in my network, and I know that I can access you, then when someone says, "Oh, well, this needs animatronics for this particular horror movie," then I'm like, I know a guy who's like always building cool stuff in his shop. Like, I gotta hit this guy up, so it's insight in mind. Being in my phone is good too, but there's steps to that. It's just like I'm trying to get in somebody else's phone. I gotta be in their network first. Like, they gotta find a reason to put me in there. So
Right. All right, good. In the show notes, I have your IMDb, your Instagram, and your 360films.us website.
yes.
Okay,
Awesome.
cool. Well, thank you very much for your time. The any thoughts in closing or anything you wanted to talk about that we didn't?
No, I just, I think I was this is super awesome. It's super cool to chat with someone who, obviously we have a couple different points of things that we have in common. Obviously, there's not a lot of people who are in the creative space who sort of have that understanding for like law enforcement. And obviously you were like a career almost, right?
Yeah, I'd call it. I was
Yeah.
going to do 20, and then my wife got transferred across the country, and I thought that I was going to win the whose job is more important, but I didn't, just because her job was she stuck around when I got deployed, and
Uh,
I was like, okay, it's time for her to do something. So
that's awesome.
yeah, she said I could write if I would move with her, and I was like,
Oh,
okay,
that's
cool,
awesome.
I'll
How
do
cool
that.
is that? How cool
Yeah,
is that?
it's working
That's
out well.
That's awesome. Yeah. So, with the law enforcement and the military, and of course, my appreciation for aviation, and with my family being in aviation, it's just super cool to chat with someone, because, I get accused of having this very like grounded perspective in my industry, because everyone wants to. We are a interesting bunch. Um, And so sometimes when things are coming from a little bit more of a sort of like steadfast, grounded point of view, it could feel like you're just, like you're just not like you're not as passionate, you're just crazy about it. It's just like I am, but
Yeah,
we still have to be reasonable here, you know. So it was a really cool chat with
yeah, it's good. Maybe we talk again sometime and get into a little more of the ideas of creativity and where that comes from. But for now, I think it's good information. Your links will be in the show notes, as I said, for people to check out, and I hope they do get some traffic on the IMDb. I've hit that page up a few times already. So
Thank you.
thank you very much. I'll talk to you at on the other side of this musical exit.
Thank you.